Welcome everyone. We'll be getting started very soon. Welcome everyone. Very nice to see you. Okay, well, greetings everyone. Welcome to you this afternoon. And I notice a lot of greetings in the chat. Hello to you all. Nice to see some familiar names again. And for those of you that this is your first workshop with us that you've joined, welcome to you too. This is a workshop with the Learning Skills Unit. And as we get started, just a reminder that we're recording the workshop this afternoon. So we're recommending you might like to turn your video off. Definitely mute your mic. That helps with noise. And we're hoping that our headsets will help improve the sound quality as well. Okay, so this afternoon's workshop is called Taking Better Notes, and I'll be presenting it with Brenda, and we're both from the Learning Skills Unit. As you've seen a few times before, this slide with some of the work that we do and the ways that we can help you at Macquarie University. We've got interactive workshops. If you have missed a workshop, couldn't make it, the recordings are going up slowly. We've started adding them, and we're also adding the slides. You'll find them in StudyWise in our online resource in iLearn. And StudyWise contains a wealth of other useful resources for you. We've also got additional resources on note-taking, our topic today, but we've got plenty of other topics as well. And as the session goes on, you may well be interested in getting somebody to read your draft or your assignment as you're getting it ready and get feedback. And we've got individual consultations available, either sending something in or chatting in real time to somebody via chat and Zoom. So I hope some of those resources might be helpful to you, and you can see the links there for more detail. So as we get started today, we've got our note-taking. Our topic today is taking better notes. So as we get started, I invite you to put into chat answers to one or more of these questions, which are, why do you take notes? how do you take notes and what do you do with them? So maybe you don't feel like answering all of those, but maybe put in an answer to one or more.
So they are coming in slowly. Thanks, Alexander. The why is to help you remember. Take notes to make it easier to understand, to help with memory retention and reading comprehension. Thanks, Lauren. Pauline uses OneNote. Vanessa, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, all right. Sue says to aid her memory, to help with assignment time. Yes, that's very useful. Try to embed the info into my brain and help to focus on what I'm learning, so that I can remember what was said. To critically assess the information, I usually take them as I listen to the lecture.
Well, lots of great responses there. I agree with a lot of you who are saying it's to help you remember.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of information coming at us, and so
right.
Trying to be able to remember that and access it later. Somebody mentioned assignments, and of course as well for exams as well, that our notes are the first step in our exam revision, really. So yes, really good. Interesting. Sorry, I was just going to say, interesting to hear someone say they're using OneNote. That's a very handy way of storing and sharing your, or sort of keeping control of your notes. That's great. More thoughts, Brenda?
Yeah, and we have Melinda, who has very kindly shared that she uses her iPad and she uses the apps GoodNotes and Notion. Thanks for sharing that, Melinda. Yeah, there are some who still write on paper. I do too. It helps me. So I think it's very much a very personal thing, whether you prefer to type it or you prefer to, scribble it or write it out.
Yes, and that's interesting. GoodNote, is it GoodNote or Goodreader? Yes, that GoodNotes, that's a great app, and I've used that as well, but I too use some paper, so a mixture of. And today we are going to encourage you to think about the things we say and then take it and make it your own. So, good.
Vanessa, if I can add one last point, Bethany, she says that she paraphrases and highlights important words and phrases them, and she takes notes of where she found the information. I think that's very good in practice.
Excellent advice. There's nothing more frustrating than taking notes from something that was really useful and then trying to find it later and you don't have the details of where it came from. Yes, and paraphrasing as you're taking notes from readings, very helpful. Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, our session today, and you can see this photo is from a different time when we've got lots of people sitting quite close to each other, but we'll be thinking today about some general strategies for note-taking. We'll think specifically about note-taking in lectures and the challenges that has. We'll think about note-taking for reading, and then we'll investigate a couple of different styles of note-taking. I thought, however, at this stage, we might listen to a very short lecture. It's just under 3 minutes, and we might have a go at note-taking, and then we'll use that to think about some of the things that we discuss as we continue. So let me stop the share and go to, in that show. All right. And sorry, just remember to start share again.
A few years ago, I felt like I was stuck in a rut. So I decided to follow in the footsteps of the great American philosopher, Morgan Spurlock, and try something new for 30 days. The idea is actually pretty simple. Think about something you've always wanted to add to your life and try it for the next 30 days. It turns out 30 days is just about the right amount of time to add a new habit or subtract a habit, like watching the news, from your life. There's a few things that I learned while doing these 30-day challenges. The first was, instead of the months flying by forgotten, the time was much more memorable. This was part of a challenge I did to take a picture every day for a month. And I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing that day. I also noticed that as I started to do more and harder 30-day challenges, my self-confidence grew. I went from desk-dwelling computer nerd to the kind of guy who bikes to work for fun. Even last year, I ended up hiking up Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. I would never have been that adventurous before I started my 30-day challenges. I also figured out that if you really want something badly enough, you can do anything for 30 days. Have you ever wanted to write a novel? Every November, tens of thousands of people try to write their own 50,000 word novel from scratch in 30 days. It turns out all you have to do is write 1,667 words a day for a month. So I did. By the way, the secret is not to go to sleep until you've written your words for the day. You might be sleep deprived, but you'll finish your novel. Now, is my book the next great American novel? No, I wrote it in a month. It's awful. But for the rest of my life, if I meet John Hodgman at a TED party, I don't have to say, I'm a computer scientist. No, if I want to, I can say, I'm a novelist. So here's one last thing I'd like to mention. I learned that when I made small, sustainable changes, things I could keep doing, they were more likely to stick. There's nothing wrong with big, crazy challenges. In fact, they're a ton of fun, but they're less likely to stick. When I gave up sugar for 30 days, day 31 looked like this. So here's my question to you. What are you waiting for? I guarantee you the next 30 days are going to pass whether you like it or not. So why not think about something you have always wanted to try and give it a shot for the next 30 days? Thanks.
All right, I wonder how you went with that taking notes. Let's get to, all right, so back here, back to full screen, Brenda.
Yes.
Right, okay, so we've just had a look at a talk. I hope maybe you had a chance to take a few notes because we'll talk about that later on. But as we get started, we'll think about two different aspects to taking notes, and that is thinking about the content and knowing what information to note down and how to do that. And then we'll think about formatting and choosing a layout or a plan for organizing that information in a way that's helpful that you can use it later on. Okay. So over to you, Brenda.
So basically, when we take notes, we go through a three-step process. The first is to prepare, then the actual note-taking activity, and then after that, we review our notes. So let's start with preparation. The next slide, please, Vanessa. So when we prepare for note-taking, we will be asking ourselves, what's the topic? We'll be looking at how does the topic relate to previous lecture? Or if I'm taking notes from my readings, I will ask the questions, how do they relate to other readings, for example? And based on my prior knowledge, what do I already know about the topic? So I prepare myself in this way before I do the actual note-taking. So the next step is when we do So if I'm preparing for a lecture, I'll look into the unit guides to look at the PowerPoint slides, any other supplementary information that could help me understand. This is very useful, especially if it comes to theories, concepts, very complex thoughts that the lecturer would have put down in the PowerPoint slides. I might even look it up, the textbook first to see what it means, or even Google to get a very simple understanding. The whole idea about the preparation is that it gives you go into the lecture with something in mind, and I often find that it's helpful because it helps me to confirm what I already know, or whether if I didn't get it right, to help me clarify. The other thing in preparation stage is also we think about the note-taking purpose. Do we want to take everything, take down everything? Like in this case, lecture notes, if PowerPoint slides have already been provided, maybe I don't have to take down everything. And sometimes, most of the times, the lecturer's speech goes faster than what we can take down. So I may just take down the key ideas. I'll take note of the experts or the papers that my lecturer referred to, and then I'll look them up later on to fill in my notes, that is, if I can't catch up during the actual note taking. What's your note taking purpose? Is it to find only specific facts and statistics, or basically how much of a detail do you want to take note in your notes? The next step is the note taking itself. So these are some of the ways some students, ourselves included, in how we've taken notes. I would like to invite you, as I go through each of them, to write in the chat whether yes, if it's a useful way of note taking, or no, if it's not a useful way of note taking. So let's go with the first one, highlighting. Is it useful? Yes for useful, no for not useful. Okay, many people said that it's yes, some no. Limited, yes. Love highlighting. Okay. Highlighting is useful if you're highlighting certain phrases or keywords. But I think as you highlight, the main thing you have to ask yourself is, do you understand it? Okay, I would highlight only for phrases that, or keywords, or definitions, for example. But I have to make sure that I understand it and not just highlight it. What about writing down every word? So someone has put an X there. For not useful, no. Certainly, yes. I highlight more than required. Okay, well, it's not always easy to write down every word because like what I mentioned earlier on, um, it's too fast, usually too fast for us to take down every single word. But is it really necessary? So I drop words, I drop prepositions, for example. I focus only on the keywords, the key content words. And then I ask myself, do I understand it? Rather than just writing it for the sake of writing. So thanks to all those who said that writing down every word is not a useful way. Thank you. Next one, drawing diagrams. Is this a useful way of note taking? Yes. Yes. Very important. Good. Yep. If done correctly, I totally agree. Yes, it can be time consuming. Not sure. I think drawing diagrams is very helpful for understanding. Okay, if you are able to draw a flow of something, it also shows that you are able to think through the process of explaining something, for example. But like some of you who have pointed out, it is time consuming. Thanks for that. Next one, typing notes. No, not useful. Not my cup of tea. Okay, Vanessa. So writing longhand helps with remembering. I remember earlier on in the chat, our student Alexander had mentioned that indeed writing it out helps us retain that information a little better than just typing. So you might want to try that if you are used to typing, to write it out in longhand and at the same time think through what you're writing and help you remember what you've written. Helps me remember. Yes, that's right. Okay, what about writing main points only? Is it useful? To a degree? Yes, definitely. If it isn't on the slides, yep, agree. Well, I guess it depends on the situation you are in. If I'm in a lecture and there isn't time to take down everything, I'll just write down the main points. And then I'll refer back during my third stage, which is the review stage. I will then go back and fill in the points, any other sub points. Now, writing main points only is very important as well, as it helps to encourage active learning. By that, I mean, so if you just write down the main words, the main points, as you are revising, you are making yourself think through again about that concept or that theory or that main point, and then relate it back to other points in the notes or relate it to future notes. So it makes you think a little bit more than just writing in full sentences. Okay, the last one. Vanessa, could you read the last one for me? I can't see it on my
Okay.
end.
The last one is using abbreviations.
Yep. Yes. Yep. So most students agree that it is useful, and they need to have a key so that you know what the abbreviation stands for. Definitely, using abbreviations would help you. It's much faster. And at the same time, it gives you that time to think about the relationships between ideas. So you're not just focused on writing down words, you're focused on writing the key points and how they relate to each other. Okay, the next slide is there are some suggestions for abbreviations, or most of you would have already practiced some form of abbreviation. Yeah, you could definitely create your own. So I use a lot: greater than, less than, equals, not equal, for example. And even words like management, I would just abbreviate it to 3 letters, MGMT, MGM or MGT, for example. So whatever that works for you, abbreviations definitely help in note taking. Thank you, Vanessa. Next slide, please. Okay, after the note-taking process, you would have the review stage. Now, so what's highlighted that in in purple uh, would be, say, a student's note-taking during a lecture on just the main points. And you notice on the left-hand side, the student has done a summary of the main point, and that helps during the review stage, because you're not just re-looking at the notes on the right or trying to memorize it, but you're trying to make your learning active by thinking about the points on the right, and either you summarize it on the left or you make connections to points before them or points after them. Some of us will also review our notes this way, where we may draw further concept maps to expand on the concept or the knowledge that we've picked up during our note taking or listening to the lecture. This also helps us develop our learning more actively. So it's not just the the key points that sit in dot points, but rather the key points, how do they relate to other points, whether it's within that week's teaching or, you know, connected to other weeks before and after. Vanessa, at this point, do you have anything you want to add to the 3 stages?
I think the one thing I'd say is that the review stage doesn't have to be very long, but it's a great way to stop and think about what you heard. And some people find it difficult to write very much while they're listening. And so review would be a time to add to your notes. Other people, so the previous slide, this one is some of my notes. I tend to take lots and lots of notes. So in my review, I need to actually summarize so that later on I can remember what the main points were. So think about your own strategies, your own skills and your strengths and weaknesses, and use that review time to make your notes better. So it doesn't mean you have to rewrite them, but it's a good time to stop and have a think about. And reflect on what you've done.
Vanessa, if you don't mind, could you return to the previous slide? I find this method, this review stage, this method is very useful when I'm doing readings, where I have summarized points on the right, and then, or I do the summary on the left-hand side of the paragraph of the reading, or I write out a whole summary of the reading, for example. So it helps a lot in my study.
Right. Good thinking. Yeah.
Okay, so many of us were talking about earlier on whether we take notes digitally or whether we handwrite our notes. I think the other thing to take note is, aside from coming up with a note-taking system that works for you, what's also very important is how do you file your notes? I think sometimes it's pretty challenging because we have a set of PowerPoint slides, we have readings, we have handwritten notes, all related. So how do we organize that? Or some of the notes can be written because it's related to an assignment. How do we organize and be able to find them? So that's interesting. And for me, in my review stage, I actually pull them all together. Or if I don't have time to do that, I make sure that I file it in a way that I can see that they are related to each other. Does that make sense to you, Vanessa?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot, we'll be reading a lot, trying to keep up with different subjects. Yeah, making sure that you can find it again is really helpful.
We have a suggestion by Melinda. She uses an app called Notion, where she inserts and links to everything she needs within her own personalized dashboard. It's like a database program for files for students. That can be very helpful. So when it comes to assignment writing or when it comes to exam prep, everything that's related to that topic or the concept is in one place. Thanks for sharing, Melinda.
Sounds great. I'll check it out.
Me too. Okay, the next one. What are some of the challenges in note-taking in lectures? So before COVID-19, all lectures were held face-to-face. Well, we did have echo recordings. So those of us who attended lectures face-to-face, we found that the challenges are, because it happens in real time, the information unfolds in real time at the same time. And we have to go according to the lecturer's pace. So we have very animated lecturers who have gone very quickly. And because also they are so familiar with the subject, some of them may have gone through very quickly. It's hard for us to keep up to note everything. And not everything is to be recorded anyway, because sometimes they digress from the topic, sometimes they put in jokes, or they may repeat to reinforce information. So this could have been some of the challenges in note-taking during lectures. But the benefits of note-taking in lectures is that listening to them, the voice, as well as their hand gestures, watching their hand gestures, we can tell at what point a key point is very significant in the lecture. And usually they use gestures to focus on, say, for example, this lecture will focus on 3 main points. So what are the 3 main points? And those are like markers to help us take note that, okay, listen out for the first main point, what's the second main point, and what's the third main point. The thing about note-taking in lectures is that sometimes because we can see each other, the lecturer is able to repeat, stop and repeat, and answer questions, but it's not so when it's online. So why do we bother to take notes if we can just download from PowerPoint? I think most of you have shared earlier on why do you take notes, and that's because to help you remember better, to help you reinforce your learning. And that's true. We take notes so that we be able to understand later. It depends. Some of us have got memories that that you can remember better. But I think over time, because of the sheer amount of information, we still have to take down the key points basically. Someone says it helps to make sure that I did attend the class. That's very good. Okay, the next slide, please. Note-taking during lecture. So what are some of the clues that we listen to? So at the introduction of the lecture, because we have done some sort of preparation in the first stage, we have an idea what will be covered. There will be information that is emphasized, so we listen out to the tone. We explained earlier, you looked out for the gestures. The lecturer will also repeat important information, and usually they do state that, like, this is very important, and they repeat it again, or they actually use words literally and say, listen up, this is very important. Information that's emphasized, we also know that because of the amount of time they spend on the points and the number of examples they use. So when I'm taking notes during a lecture, I do pay attention to the examples that they use and try to link back and think about why are the examples relevant or useful. The other clues to look out for to decide what is important in a lecture would be, what are the references that they are making? Which experts are they referring to? Whose works are they referring to? So I'll take note of the names. I'll take note of the pages, for example. What else is important would be specific terms, definitions, most of the time, in order to help us build our knowledge on those concepts and ideas. And examples are particularly useful. I find that examples help me understand and again able to apply the concept to the real world use or to the context.
Good. I wonder if we've got any questions or further comments at the moment before we move on to the next section. How do you find listening in lectures and taking notes?
We have a question. How do you know what's important in a reading?
Oh, good. Well, we're just about to move on to that, and thank you. That is a good question. All right, we might move on then in that case. Mm-hmm. So we've just been talking about taking notes during lectures, and the fact that they're running in real time means that we've got certain challenges to manage. Note taking for reading is a little bit different, as we know. And so some of the challenges for taking notes are that the text often is quite long and heavy, and it feels like there's so much information in it. Readings often are more technical, so the language in them is more technical and it's more complex, so it can be a little bit slower to get through than a lecture. And as Brenda said, in a lecture, you're getting a bit of extra help from the emphasis and the gestures that the lecturer is using, and maybe the visuals that they've got on PowerPoint slides as well. You don't always have those in a reading. And it can be very tempting when we're looking at a reading to highlight a lot. And one of my challenges is that I tend to highlight way too much. So it's very tempting to take too many notes or to highlight too much as you're reading. The benefit, though, is that everything is there ready for us. So if we want to just jump to one section to read only that, we're able to do that. Whereas in a lecture, you have to sort of sit and wait for it to sort of progress for you to get to the points that you want to use. Readings often are more clearly structured. So you might have at the beginning of a lecture, I'm going to talk about 3 points. It's not always easy to work out where they change, whereas with a reading, you'll have headings and subheadings that can help you work through the text. And if you're not sure, you can jump back, you can jump forward, so you can go at your own pace and work through it there. Okay, so what are some of the things as you're reading that you might want to read for and to take notes about? And I will just mention now, we have a workshop tomorrow afternoon, sorry, that's tomorrow morning at 11, which is about reading essentials and reading critically and being an effective reader. So that's something that could be useful as well. But as you're reading and you're thinking about taking notes, some of the things that you might be looking for are the key words. Brenda's mentioned that already with lectures. You might want to note down what theory they're talking about. You might have a class where you've got several different theories being presented, and you need to notice carefully which theory they're talking about at this stage. Picking out the main ideas. Any suggestions here? How do you find main ideas?
So someone has said the abstract, from the abstract, the introduction, the subheadings, the topic. Very good.
Thank you. Yeah. So readings are often structured to help us, and they've got things like introductions and abstracts and even keywords at the top of a reading that help show you what the main points are going to be. Then you continue reading on for more detail. So sometimes you're just reading to get an overview. So you might be wanting to note what some of the keywords are and what some of the main ideas are. Sometimes you're reading perhaps for an assignment and you need quite a bit of detail. And then you might look more carefully at what evidence are they using? How are they supporting that? And you might want to make a few notes. Sort of depends what your goal is as you're reading. You probably don't want to put too much evidence in, because then your notes get very long and they're not so much notes anymore, are they? They're just copying out information. Sometimes you might come across the nicest quote. It's just so clear, it explains a point in a few short words, and then you might want to note that down as a direct quote that you could use in an assignment. Other times, though, you're trying to think critically, and it might be as you're reading that you're remembering something you've read in another class, something you've studied before. And so notes can also include those thoughts that you've got. How does this link to other things I know? Is it similar? Is it different? Or if there are things that you really don't understand, or you're not sure that you agree with the writer's logic, you might put questions for yourself. Brenda mentioned that you might squiggle a few questions in the margin as you're going along. And you could even, probably a really good strategy is, once you've read something, write a couple of sentences where you evaluate it. Write down, what was your reaction? You know, this was really useful. Section 2 was great. The key points were this, whatever. It can be very short, but that can be a very useful note-taking strategy. All right, well, as in this last section, we'll talk about some different formats for taking notes. A lot of us take linear notes, but I'll introduce you to 3 others, or maybe you've met them before, but we'll do a refresher on them. So the ones that we're most familiar with are linear notes. The linear notes are that they're written in the same order that you read or that you hear. So the first line, and then when you hear the next point, you write it underneath and underneath. And then you indent subpoints. So if you think you've got a main idea, that goes right next to the left-hand side. And then if there's a subpoint, you move it in a little bit. So it's very easy to see groups of ideas where you think that you've got some relationships going on. A disadvantage is, though, that although you've got some indentations, so you show some relationships, it can be hard to see overall relationships throughout the text. So how does point 3 relate to point 2? What's the organization? Is it chronology? What happens first? What happens second? Is it the result? Is it the cause? Is it the implication? Is it the effect? So on. So these sorts of notes, quite good at giving you main ideas, but there are some challenges as well. Another type of notes is called the Cornell note-taking system. This is particularly good if you've got a subject that's got a lot of different facts. So for example, if you're taking a science course, perhaps even if you're taking a history course, medical science, and if you've got exams, because it's set up to help you, in fact, write your exam notes just after you take your notes. The suggestion for Cornell is that on the right-hand side of your page, you take normal linear notes. So as you're listening to your lecture or you're reading the textbook, you're taking notes and you're indenting as you think things are subpoints, so on, going down there. Once you've completed those notes, you add some notes in the left-hand side. And this is when review your notes from the right-hand side and pick out what are the key words, what are the definitions, and you can even use it to write down some test questions. So in this side, you're taking the view perhaps of a teacher or a lecturer, and you're saying, what are the key points that students need to know about this? What are some questions that I could ask them in the exam to test whether they understand, whether they've remembered? And that left-hand side then can become the place that you review when you're doing your exam preparation. But our recommendation is that you do it straight after you've taken your regular notes. So if you take your regular notes in class, come out of class, and by the end of the day, try and write up those notes in the left-hand column. And at the bottom, you can write a summary as well. So instead of just being notes or dot points, this is a couple of sentences. And a great benefit of this is that it's getting you practicing explaining things in your own words, which again is really useful for exams where you might have short answer questions or essay questions. You're practicing writing about the things that you are learning. So that's considered a very successful style of taking notes.
And Vanessa, I find that very useful in my learning as well, because the notes aren't just sitting there on the page. I'm actively working with the notes to help reinforce my learning and help me make connections to other weeks' learnings, or to other weeks, or even to other units sometimes.
That's great. We've mentioned those things before, but this is quite a nice way of making sure that you're doing that. Yes, you're being active, you're making connections, so on. Yep, thank you. Any other comments coming through on chat at the moment? Okay, I wonder if any of you use Cornell Notes or have in the past. All right, we'll talk about another type of note-taking, which is becoming very, very popular, and that's sketchnoting. So instead of just taking linear notes, first, second, next, following on, you're actually trying to create diagrams and images to record the main ideas. And the benefit for this is that it can be much easier to show the relationships between ideas. So if you look at the little notes on the left-hand side of the page, you can see at the top that there's a series of little arrows pointing to the left, and it's showing developmental stages and how they relate to the assimilation pole. And so it's talking about two different theories of learning. On the left-hand side, it's got, I think it's Piaget, and Piaget says that we develop and we continue and we progress and we go from one thing to the next. And on the right-hand side is the constructionism of Seymour Papert, who says we always stay in the same area and we've got different things happening. We've got cognitive and affective and sensory motor all impacting on our learning, as you can see. And underneath we've got Vygotsky's socio-constructivism, big long words. Doesn't matter if you don't understand, but you can see it's talking about some progression and how things, one thing leads to another and how learners develop. And we've got the two hands touching, that we've got the teacher and the learner working together. If you look on Twitter, if you look on Flickr, you look on any of the visual social sharing platforms, you'll see that these are very popular. There's sketch notes, visual thinking, graphic recording, graphic facilitation. It's quite a big and popular area. And if you're at all creative, you might find it's a really nice way to manage your academic study by diagramming things. The final type of note-taking I'll mention is one that we've mentioned a few times in some of the workshops this week and last, and that is thinking about a reading matrix, a reading log, a synthesis matrix. And it's a fancy name for a table, but the point is that as you're starting to look at a few different sources, for example, for an assignment, you might want to notice what the similarities and the differences are so that you can start to group those ideas and use them to form arguments to support your writing. So this is just one suggestion. It's up to you how you do it. I think in some of the other workshops, we've had the sources down the left-hand side and we've had the key points up the top. Very flexible, up to you how you organize it. But for example, we could have three sources. We could say, what theory did they use to examine the issue? What were their definitions? What was their thesis or their stance, and what sort of evidence did they give? And then you could sort of map out and compare what's going on between those three. Any questions or comments at the moment?
Not yet, but I'd like to add that at this point, if you're using the synthesis matrix, it will be good when you're taking the notes to actually write them in your own words, okay, paraphrase rather than copying from the original text. Simply because when I'm assuming if you're using this for assignment, to write your assignment, sometimes a student will get so excited with the ideas, they may just transfer the ideas from this table directly to the paragraphs and accidentally forget to rewrite in their own words or to cite.
Yes, that's a good point. And I remember somebody mentioned that in our opening chat as well about paraphrasing as they're taking notes.
Yes.
Yes, that's a very good point to remember.
Vanessa, we do have a question. How do you keep notes concise?
That's a very good question. I tend to write quite long notes. And as you saw, I often go back with a highlighter and circle things and write a few notes next to it just as a summary. But it sort of depends what your purpose is. Sometimes your notes should be quite detailed, but to keep notes concise, I think if you focus on what the main points are, that means not including too many examples, or maybe picking some of the keywords and using abbreviations to show how they relate to each other. So arrows to show what leads to what increases, what decreases. Brenda, what are your thoughts? Has anybody else got any good advice?
I guess for me, keeping it concise means focusing on the main ideas and the keywords. Because if I start taking down everything that, verbatim, then that's where it gets really lengthy, and chances of me rereading them again very, very low.
Yeah, and it's not so helpful when all of a sudden you've got an exam coming up in a couple of weeks and you wanted to review your notes, but they're so long. It makes it much harder. So yes, and that is a good question for that reason, keeping them concise.
Okay. We do have some recommendations, some sharing in the chat about the Cornell system. And then we have very helpful students who are sharing that you can get Cornell system templates in the iPad note-taking programs. Or if you just Google Cornell Notes, you'll find templates.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Yep. I would just one quick share as well. I know someone mentioned GoodNotes, which is an app for taking notes. I remember a student coming to the information desk a few years ago. She had downloaded the PowerPoint slides and she'd actually taken notes using GoodNote on the PowerPoint slides for her classes. So she was able to save things together, which was a very good way of organizing and keeping track of things. Okay. All right. Well, in the last part of this workshop, I thought we might review the mini lecture that we heard before and review the notes that we made and have a go at changing them into Cornell notes or maybe sketch notes, up to you. So I'm wondering, would you like to hear the lecture again? It was 3 minutes long. Or are you happy to just go back now to the notes that you took before?
Let's see. Before is okay. Someone wants to ask, wouldn't mind listening again. I forgot to take notes. Busy watching just now.
I'm sure. Okay, let's listen to it one more time and get you to have a go taking some notes, maybe thinking about some of the things we talked about. If we get time, we might try putting them into the Cornell style. Okay, so let me just end that show. Share screen. All right, so get out whatever you like, your typing or pencil and paper, whatever. It's a very short lecture. Have a listen, see if you can pick out the main ideas, and then we'll have a little chat and see what you got.
A few years ago, I felt like I was stuck in a rut. So I decided to follow in the footsteps of the great American philosopher, Morgan Spurlock, and try something new for 30 days. The idea is actually pretty simple. Think about something you've always wanted to add to your life and try it for the next 30 days. It turns out 30 days is just about the right amount of time to add a new habit or subtract a habit, like watching the news, from your life. There's a few things that I learned while doing these 30-day challenges. The first was, instead of the months flying by forgotten, the time was much more memorable. This was part of a challenge I did to take a picture every day for a month, and I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing that day. I also noticed that as I started to do more and harder 30-day challenges, my self-confidence grew. I went from desk-dwelling computer nerd to the kind of guy who bikes to work for fun. Even last year, I ended up hiking up Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. I would never have been that adventurous before I started my 30-day challenges. I also figured out that if you really want something badly enough, you can do anything for 30 days. Have you ever wanted to write a novel? Every November, tens of thousands of people try to write their own 50,000 word novel from scratch in 30 days. It turns out all you have to do is write 1,667 words a day for a month. So I did. By the way, the secret is not to go to sleep until you've written your words for the day. You might be sleep deprived, but you'll finish your novel. Now, is my book the next great American novel? No, I wrote it in a month. It's awful. But for the rest of my life, if I meet John Hodgman at a TED party, I don't have to say, I'm a computer scientist. No, if I want to, I can say, I'm a novelist. So here's one last thing I'd like to mention. I learned that when I made small, sustainable changes, things I could keep doing, they were more likely to stick. There's nothing wrong with big, crazy challenges. In fact, they're a ton of fun, but they're less likely to stick. When I gave up sugar for 30 days, day 31 looked like this. So here's my question to you. What are you waiting for? I guarantee you the next 30 days are going to pass whether you like it or not. So why not think about something you have always wanted to try and give it a shot for the next 30 days. Thanks.
There we go. All righty. And I have lost my PowerPoint. Just closed it. All right, well, as I'm reopening the PowerPoint, how did you go taking notes? Would anybody like to make any comments on how they went? How did you find that one?
So Sue shared that she missed names.
Yes. Okay. Yes, that can be tricky to pick up names.
Yes.
He tended to sort of make a bit of a point and then have an example. And so you might have decided that you didn't need to have the example to include that. Or you might have decided that you didn't even need the names, like the name of the first person whose movie he talks about.
Melinda shared that she's, after listening to the lecture, she managed to get the main points, the takeaways, the action steps, and the reasons why.
Great work. Good.
And then Lauren shared that it's much easier to identify the key points now that she knows how to evaluate the speaker's gestures and tone of voice. Well done.
Yes. It's a good extra sort of bit of help for us.
Yes. At this point, because most lectures are longer than this is only a 3-minute clip. So not very often. I mean, we can definitely play back lectures to listen again, but assuming if we don't have time to re-listen, I would like to share that usually when you do the preparation, so if you have looked at names or if you have looked at theories or concepts, it helps you when you are taking notes, um, when you're listening to a lecture and taking notes. So you don't have to go back and re-listen again.
Yeah, and we would definitely recommend that you don't try and listen to all of every lecture. That's not really what we're saying. It might be that there was a lecture where there was a small part that you thought was really useful. It might be worth listening to that again. And
Yep.
I do know that people sometimes play it at 1.5 speed till they find the bits that are most relevant, and then they slow down.
Sue has a question. How do you watch for body language and take notes at the same time?
That's a very good question. I think often body language and voice go together. So, for example, I did this as I emphasized voice.
Yep.
I think even if you don't see it, you can often hear. And that can be a clue if you need to stop and have a quick look.
Okay, we don't have anything else in the chat, Vanessa.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of our hour, and I put up a couple of notes that I took myself about that 30-day challenge. As you can see, not perfect. I made a couple of little doodles as I went through because I quite like that. And then I tried to turn it into a Cornell as well, to use the Cornell style. But anyway, we're finished now. Thank you very much for all your participation. Great to have your feedback and your thoughts. And as we mentioned, the recording and the notes, the slides will be up in StudyWise sometime soon. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
And yes, all the best with your note taking this session. Thank you.